Alright, I'm going to do a video today for a fellow YouTuber, Kirk McCutcheon. I've been subbed to his channel for quite a long time. He's an excellent trapper and a bass fisherman. And I said I'd show him some rigs on how to, different ways to rig a wacky worm using the same hook. Give him a bit more versatility. If the fish, gets fed up of seeing the same thing. He said he uses a wacky rigged worm a lot, so I'm going to show him a couple different things you can do with that. Here's worms that I would ordinarily wacky rig. One is a 4-inch senko with the neon tip here. That works really well in dark water. This one will be better for clear water. This one is made by Bass Pro Shop. This one is a Strike King. They're both senko style worms. They're a whole bunch of different names for them. Ocho worms, stick worms, cigar worms. They're all the same thing. They're all a copy of Gary Yamamoto's senko. Now you can see this one doesn't have a band in the center. This one has a heat shrink band in the center. What it is a piece of electrical heat shrinking tubing that I put over the worm and melted. Some of these worms are pretty soft and they have a tendency to tear when you catch fish. So you put the heat shrink tubing on it. Let me see if I have a hook here. Use the fine wire. You put the heat shrink tubing on it. If you pierce the hook through the heat shrink tubing instead of through the worm, if you're going to wacky rig it like that, the heat shrink tubing will actually keep the worm intact and prevent the worm from ripping, and you'll be able to catch a lot more fish on that worm. A lot of times bass have a tendency to rip the worm in half. They'll rip it right off the hook and pull it right through it. And you can go through a packet of worms pretty quick if you're catching a lot of fish. That gets kind of pricey. So that's a good way to make the bait last a little bit longer. You can get heat shrink. You can also get O-rings. Do the same thing. You can actually feed the hook. I'll show you quickly. Take this one out. You can feed the hook through the just barely nip the worm, feed the hook through the O-ring, and it will prevent the worm from tearing. And make the worm last a little bit longer. Now, if you're going to use a regular long shank worm hook, there's a lot of different ways you can rig this worm. You can wacky rig it like what we had. That would be a standard wacky rig. Just like that. Hook the worm in the center. Now to add different action to that worm, you can fish it weightless like that. Of course, the idea of the wacky rig worm like that, as it falls to the water, the worm wiggles on the way down. It gives it a good action. Now if you want to change that action, you can get a regular nail. You can buy commercial weights for this, but it's just cheaper to buy a nail. You put the nail into the end of the worm like that. Now you've added weight to that end of the worm. So when you pull it up through the water, it will come up like this. But when you let it slackline, it will drop straight back down because of the weight in the nose. It won't shimmy on the way down now because you've changed the weight of the worm. So it will drop straight down. It's good for getting into grass or fishing around rock. If you're trying to fish around structure and you want the worm to go straight down, that's a good way to do that. Another way to rig this, I ordinarily wouldn't use an EWG hook like that. You can see that, like that. This is like a size 1, size 2 EWG. If you leave the weight in the head of the worm, like that, and then hook it about 3/4 of the way up, like so, with the hook facing like that. There's a better look at it. So now your weight is down here, nail weight in the bottom, and it will fish on the bottom like that. So you can keep contact with it and the worm will bounce up and down. It's called a Nico rig. And then of course your line is holding the worm here, so it actually will sit like that. That's a very unique presentation. It makes the worm stand up without using like a shaky head. So you can, bottom hop the worm along the bottom, gives it a lot of action. This is also really good for fishing grass because the worm wants to go straight down when you cast it in because of the weight again. But it will, you know, buckle and shake on the way up, and then you can present it on the bottom just like that. You can use a heavier weight for that. You can, you know, cut the worm or cut the hook off a jig head like this, and then put that weight into the bottom of the worm. It's much, much heavier. Of course, with these type of worms, if you want to really quickly, you can obviously Texas rig it. Put the hook through about that much. Feed it through. Of course, this would go to a line. Obviously, you would have a weight on the line before you rig it. Pull it up over that so your line comes in there. Mark the worm where the hook is going to go through. Bend it a little bit. Bring it right through the worm. And then you can bury the hook on the other side to make it like completely weedless. Just like that. And then of course your line would come out the front here. That would be a traditional, like a Texas rig. You can fish it weightless like this, or you can use a worm weight on the front of the worm to give you more weight to get it to the, you know, to the bottom in deeper water. Another way you can rig it is nose hook it like a drop shot. If you want very little motion out of the worm, nose hook it like that, and you can drop shot it like that if you tie the hook further up the line and use a weight below it. But if you're just using a regular line directly to the hook, if you swim the worm like that, it will have very little motion, and a lot of times the fish will key on that, because if you look at like small fry and stuff in the water, when they swim, they don't make very much motion. It's more of a visual strike rather than, you know, finding something that is putting off a lot of vibration and a lot of noise. That's a pretty popular technique now. Jackal perfected that with their eye motion lures and worms. They don't put off very much, they don't displace very much water. Now this is just a regular worm hook. You could also use this one back in here. This is a shielded, it's a weed proof Wacky hook. So it would fish like that. You're fishing around weed or grass. It's got the little prongs on it that kind of shield the hook, but they will just fold out of the way. All it is nylon that's tied to the eye of the hook, so it makes it weedless. It'll push weed and grass and stuff out of the way, but when the fish bites it, of course, they fall out of the way and you can grab it. This you could also do the same thing with this. You can nose hook it just like that. You're gonna fish it weightless. You can, you know, wacky hook it in the center. You can do the Nico rig with this too. This will also work with this. The hook has to go this way. Same way, just like that. So it fishes from the top, you're fishing it off the bottom like that. Then of course the hook is already facing upwards, so when the fish comes and grabs it, you got him. If you're fishing deeper water, you would use a flick shake hook. It's got a weight on it. You can also get a regular hook and just clip a lead weight onto it. We'll do exactly the same thing. And then you wacky rig the worm like so, with the weight in the center. This makes the worm fall much faster, and it really gives a lot of action on the way down. Because the weight is pulling the worm down. And then of course when you jig it up, it flops up and down on the way up, and then it will really vibrate on the way down. It gives it a lot more action, and it will get it to the bottom quicker. So if you're fishing in wind or you're moving on a boat, that's going to anchor the worm down. Sometimes you have to dead stick these worms. If you leave them sit on the bottom, they'll work good like that too. This worm I would prefer to use in clear water because it's a more natural type color. It has a little flake in it. This worm here is a solid colored worm with the neon, the chartreuse. That's really, really good in dark water. I know Kirk fishes a lot of tea stained water, like it's pretty dark. So, you know, worms that are solid colors would work better, or bright colors so they can see it easier. Or black, even a jet black worm would work really well. One more way you can rig this, if you're using a regular walleye, you can regular walleye jig. Classic jig worm, Al Linder special. You just thread it on, feed the hook through, and push it right down. That right there is a classic, a jig worm. That can't be beat. That will catch fish all the way from northern Manitoba down to Louisiana. That'll catch fish. Has done for years. Of course, you got to be careful fishing it in structural. You can get weed guarded hooks and stuff like that as well. But that's a pretty simple rig, and that will work too. That will work all the time. They made a newer version of this rig now. It's called a shaky head, which is pretty much a jig worm. This is a shaky head. You can see the hook has a screw lock on it. So you would just turn the worm into the screw lock. That would hold the head of the worm, and then you would force the hook through it. Like so. You can textapose it. Just nip the other side of it. That would make it weedless. Like that. Now this would sit on the bottom like that. You just sit there and shake it and wait for Mr. Bass to come along. You can see that the weight is shaped like a little anvil there, so it rides like that on the bottom. It's also smooth for dragging the worm on the bottom, so you would drag it. This would work really well, of course, with a floating worm, because that worm wants to stand straight up out of the rock or off the whatever bottom you're fishing on. If it's a silty bottom or if it's a sandy bottom, the worm sticks straight up. That works really well. As you can see, there's a million different hook types and rig types that you can use for that. But these senko worms, they will catch fish all day and all night, no problem. You can also rig it on a regular straight worm hook. Just a regular straight worm hook. This one's it's a trocar. It's got a keeper on the back side of it there, just to hold the worm on it. So you just feed the worm. Same as a Texas rig. You pull the keeper into the worm like that, and then push the hook through. This time you wouldn't come all the way through. You would leave it buried in the worm, so it makes it weedless. Just like that. And then you've got to strike pretty hard with it. When you strike pretty hard, boom, the hook comes out the other side. Like that. You got him. This hook is made for a skinnier worm. You need a little bigger hook than that. For the thicker the plastic you go, the bigger the hook you're going to need. That's why I like using the extra wide gap hooks with the fatter worms, because it gives you more clearance and you're going to get a better hook set. So I hope that information helps Kirk out and give him a couple of different options to rig the same worm. He doesn't have to buy any more worms or switch to a different bait. There's lots of different ways you can rig the worms. Like I said, I hope you find it helpful. If you want to check out Kirk's channel, just search Kirk McCutcheon, and his channel will come up. It's a great channel for trapping. Lots of information on there. And it's time to go fishing. See you guys next time.